Welcome to Boring Podcast, the perfect companion for sleepless nights. If you find this episode helpful, please consider liking and subscribing. So, we've all been there, staring at a cluttered spice rack, unsure of where anything is. It can be quite the predicament, really. Finding the cumin when you need the cumin. Or the paprika when the recipe calls for paprika. A disorganized spice rack can really slow down the cooking process, you know. And sometimes, it's just, well, visually unappealing. I mean, who wants to see mismatched jars and labels all askew? It's not very aesthetically pleasing. So tonight, we're going to delve into a rather specific, yet surprisingly complex topic. Alphabetizing your spice rack. It might seem simple at first glance, but trust me, there are layers to this. Yes, alphabetizing your spice rack. It's more involved than one might initially think. There's the question of what to do with blends, for instance. Do you alphabetize by the first spice in the blend? Or do you consider the overall name of the blend? For example, Italian seasoning. Does it go under I for Italian, or O for oregano, assuming oregano is the predominant spice? These are the kinds of weighty questions we grapple with. And then there's the issue of duplicate spices. Perhaps you have 2 jars of paprika, one sweet and one smoked. Do they go next to each other? Or do you separate them based on their specific type? These are the complexities we will explore. There's a whole world of organizational possibilities within that small space on your kitchen counter. It can be quite the conundrum, you see. Exactly. It's not just a matter of a disease, there are nuances. Consider the size and shape of the jars themselves. Do you arrange them by height? Or perhaps by volume? Some people might prioritize uniformity, opting for matching jars and labels. Others might embrace a more eclectic look, with a mix of vintage tins and modern containers. And what about the labels themselves? Handwritten or printed, plain or decorative? It can become quite a design project if you let it. The possibilities are almost endless, really. You could spend hours pondering these decisions. Indeed. And then there's the question of frequency of use. Do you place the spices you use most often at the front for easy access? Or do you strictly adhere to the alphabetical order, regardless of how often you reach for a particular spice? For instance, I use garlic powder almost daily, but it would be nestled between garam masala and ginger if I strictly alphabetized. So the question becomes, do I prioritize practicality or maintain a strict alphabetical system? It's a delicate balance to strike. A constant internal debate. You've hit upon another key point. The practicality versus the aesthetic. Sometimes they are in harmony, and sometimes they clash. One must consider the overall flow of the kitchen. Does the spice rack arrangement complement the rest of the kitchen decor? Or does it stand out like a sore thumb? These are important considerations, albeit often overlooked. And then, of course, there's the matter of cleaning the spice rack. How does the chosen arrangement affect the ease of cleaning? A crowded rack can be difficult to dust and wipe down. These are the practicalities we must consider. Precisely. The cleaning aspect is often forgotten. Dust and grime can accumulate on those little jars, especially if they're tucked away in a corner. And then there's the issue of spills. If a jar of turmeric spills, how easily can it be cleaned up given the current arrangement of your spices? It's something to think about. Another layer of complexity added to the already multifaceted world of spice rack organization. It's a surprisingly deep topic when you delve into the details. It truly is. We've only just scratched the surface here. There are so many factors to consider. From the mundane to the aesthetic, the practical to the purely preferential. Organizing your spice rack is a journey of self-discovery, a reflection of your personal organizational philosophy. And in the end, isn't that what truly matters? Yes, the journey of spice rack organization is a deeply personal one. And we'll continue exploring its many facets in the episodes to come. For now, consider the points we've discussed, and ponder your own spice rack situation. It's something to think about as you drift off to sleep. Good night and sweet dreams. So, we were talking about alphabetizing the spice rack. And I think it's important to consider the size of the spice jars. You see, some spice jars are taller than others, and some are wider. Some are even square, while others are round. And this can really affect how they fit on the rack. You might have a small, round jar of cumin next to a tall, square jar of paprika. And visually, that might not be the most pleasing arrangement. It might even make it harder to find the spice you're looking for, especially if you have a lot of spices. So, size is definitely a factor to consider. I mean, it's not the most important thing, but it's something to think about. Yes, the size and shape of the spice jars are definitely considerations. And then there's the material of the jars. Some are glass, some are plastic, and occasionally, you might even find a metal tin. The different materials can catch the light differently. A glass jar might sparkle a bit more than a plastic one, depending on the lighting in your kitchen. And the labels on the jars can be different too. Some are printed directly onto the glass, others are paper stickers. Some have handwritten labels, which can add a personal touch, I suppose. And the color of the labels can vary quite a bit. So there's a lot to think about. It's not just about the spices themselves. It's about the whole visual presentation of the spice rack. And the weight of the jars. A full jar of something like dried oregano will weigh less than a full jar of, say, ground cinnamon. Because cinnamon is denser. And if your spice rack is on a wall, you might need to consider the weight distribution. You wouldn't want to put all the heavy jars on one side and all the light jars on the other. It might not be balanced. It could even make the rack unstable. So, weight is a factor, albeit a minor one. Although, I suppose it depends on how many spices you have and how sturdy your spice rack is. Absolutely. The material of the spice rack itself plays a role too. Is it wood, metal, plastic? Each material has its own properties. Wood might be more traditional, but metal might be easier to clean. And plastic is often lighter. The color of the spice rack can also affect the overall look of your kitchen. You might want a spice rack that matches your cabinets, or maybe you prefer a contrasting color. There are so many options to choose from. It can be quite overwhelming, really. Then there's the question of how often you use certain spices. If you use a spice every day, like salt or pepper, you probably want it to be easily accessible. Maybe at the front of the rack or on a lower shelf. While spices you use less often, like saffron or star anise, can be tucked away further back. Or maybe even stored in a separate container altogether. It's all about optimizing the organization for your specific cooking habits. And the expiration dates on the spices. It's good to check those regularly and discard any spices that are past their prime. Because they might lose their flavor, or even worse, they could attract unwanted pests. So, it's a good idea to go through your spices every so often and check the dates. And while you're doing that, you could also wipe down the jars to keep them clean and free of dust. It's just good kitchen hygiene. Thinking about it, even the font on the spice labels can be a factor. Some fonts are easier to read than others, especially from a distance. And the size of the font matters too. If you have trouble reading small print, you might want to look for spice jars with larger labels, or even consider making your own labels with a clear, easy-to-read font. It just makes things easier. And the height of the spice rack itself. If it's too high, you might need a step stool to reach the top shelves. And if it's too low, you might have to bend down uncomfortably to see the spices on the bottom shelves. So, finding the right height is important for ergonomics. It can make a big difference in how comfortable it is to use your spice rack. And that can affect how often you cook, which is, I suppose, the whole point of having spices in the first place. I suppose one could even organize their spices by cuisine, keeping all the Italian herbs together, all the Indian spices together, and so on. That might be a practical approach if you tend to cook specific types of cuisine regularly. Though, personally, I prefer alphabetical order. It just seems more logical to me. If you find this episode helpful, please consider liking and subscribing. Good night and sweet dreams. Less than, person 1 greater than less than person 1 greater than so, we were talking about alphabetizing the spice rack. It's really quite a straightforward process when you break it down. You take all the spices out, one by one, and you look at the labels. Sometimes the labels are a bit sticky, you know, from cooking. You might have to wipe them off. I usually use a slightly damp cloth, not too wet, mind you. Too much moisture can damage the labels. Then, you have to consider where to put the spices while you're alphabetizing. A clean countertop is best, but sometimes the counter is cluttered. Then what? Well, the kitchen table is usually a good alternative. Just make sure it's clean. Yes, a clean surface is essential. You don't want to get your spice jars dirty. Imagine, you've just cleaned them and then they get dusty or sticky again. What a waste of effort. And you have to think about the size of the jars too. Some are small, some are large. Maybe you have little tins of spices. It's best to group similar sizes together, I think. It makes the rack look neater. Or maybe you prefer to arrange them by color? That could be visually appealing. Although, alphabetizing is the most practical in the long run, I find. It makes finding the spice you need so much easier. Alphabetizing is definitely the most practical, especially if you have a lot of spices. I have so many spices. I keep adding to my collection. It's getting a bit out of hand, really. I should probably go through them and see if any are past their expiration dates. Although, do spices really expire? I'm not entirely sure. Anyway, back to alphabetizing. Once you have them all out on a clean surface, you can start arranging them in alphabetical order. To Z, it's quite simple, really. Simple, yes, but it can be time-consuming, depending on how many spices you have. And what about duplicates? Sometimes I buy a spice and then forget I already have it. So I end up with 2 jars of the same spice. What do you do then? Do you keep both, or do you combine them into one jar? I suppose it depends on how much you have left in each jar. And how old they are. It's something to consider. Duplicates are a common problem. I've certainly had that happen to me. I usually combine them if they are the same brand. Otherwise, I just keep them separate. It can be a bit confusing having 2 jars of the same spice, though. Especially if they are different sizes. It can make the spice rack look a bit cluttered. So, yes, combining them is probably the best solution. If possible. And what about those little packets of spices you sometimes get? The ones that come with certain meal kits or recipe boxes. They're never the right size for the spice rack. I usually just keep them in a separate drawer. But then I forget about them. It's a bit of a dilemma. Perhaps I should label them and put them in alphabetical order too. Although, they are so small. It hardly seems worth the effort. Those little packets are tricky. I sometimes use them right away and then throw them out. But if I don't use them, they just end up cluttering the drawer. I've tried organizing them, but it never seems to last. They just get jumbled up again. Perhaps a small container specifically for those packets would be helpful. Something clear, so you can see what's inside. Although, then you have another container to clean. Cleaning is an important part of kitchen organization, isn't it? Keeping everything clean and tidy. Wiping down the spice jars, cleaning the spice rack, cleaning the countertops. It's an ongoing process, but it's worth it in the end. A clean and organized kitchen is a happy kitchen. Or so they say. Good night and sweet dreams. So, we were talking about alphabetizing the spice rack. I find it's best to take everything out first. Every single jar, bottle, and tin. Even the ones you don't use often. Like that smoked paprika I bought for a specific recipe 2 years ago and haven't touched since. It's probably still good. Or maybe not. I should probably check the expiration date. But that's a task for another day. Anyway, taking everything out allows you to see what you have and wipe down the shelves. Sometimes there are little spills or dust. Mostly dust, I suppose. Unless you're particularly clumsy with the turmeric, like I was last week. It made quite a mess. A bright yellow mess. Yes, removing everything is crucial. It creates a blank slate. A fresh start for your spices. I like to group similar spices together as I take them out. All the herbs in one pile, the spices in another, and then the blends in a third. That way, when you put them back, you already have a general organizational structure. Although, strictly speaking, for pure alphabetization, that pre-grouping isn't strictly necessary. But I find it soothing. It's like a mini sorting exercise before the main event. Sometimes I even arrange them by size within the groups. Smallest to largest, or sometimes largest to smallest. It depends on my mood, I suppose. Which is rarely anything other than neutral. Speaking of organization, I recently reorganized my sock drawer. It was quite a project. I used to just throw them in there, all jumbled up. But now I've folded them neatly and arranged them by color. It's much more satisfying. Where was I? Oh yes, the spices. Once you've taken them all out, you can start the alphabetization process. I like to start with A and work my way down to Z, methodical and predictable. Just like this podcast. It's oddly comforting. Absolutely. A to Z is the logical approach. Although, I've experimented with Z to A just to see what it's like. It's different. Not necessarily better or worse. Just different. Kind of like driving a different route to the grocery store. You still get there, but the scenery changes slightly. Sometimes I take the long way just to avoid that one traffic light that always seems to be red. It's probably only a minute or two difference, but it feels significant. I know what you mean. Sometimes I walk a slightly longer route to work just to avoid walking past that barking dog. It's a small, fluffy thing, but it makes an awful racket. It's quite disruptive to my otherwise peaceful morning walk. I often think about getting a dog, but then I remember how much work they are. Feeding, walking, grooming. It's a lot of responsibility. And then there's the barking. I prefer the quiet. Quiet is good, especially when trying to sleep. Which is, presumably, why you're listening to this podcast. We should probably get back to the spice rack. Once you have your spices alphabetized, it's important to put them back neatly. Don't overcrowd the shelves. Give each jar or bottle enough space. It just looks nicer that way. More organized. Yes, spacing is key. Overcrowding can lead to spills. And nobody wants spilled cumin. It gets everywhere. It's quite pungent. And it's difficult to clean up. Especially if it gets mixed with other spices. Then it's a real mess. Aromatic, but messy. Indeed. So, alphabetize your spices. It's a simple task, but it can bring a sense of order to your kitchen. And maybe, just maybe, a little bit of peace to your life. Or not. It's just a spice rack, after all. Good night and sweet dreams. So, we were talking about alphabetizing the spice rack. It's important to have a system, you know. Otherwise, it can get quite disorganized. And then when you're looking for that specific spice, say, paprika, for example, you might spend minutes searching. Minutes that you could be using to do something else. Perhaps staring at the ceiling. Or counting the threads on your blanket. But finding the paprika quickly, that's the goal. Alphabetizing helps with that. It's a simple concept, really. Just putting things in order. A to Z like a dictionary or an encyclopedia. Although, encyclopedias aren't as common these days, are they? I suppose they're mostly online now. But the principle is the same. Order. System. Alphabetical order. Yes, that's what we're talking about. Right. Alphabetical order. It's a good system for a spice rack. You start with anise, perhaps. Or allspice. Depending on what you have, of course. Everyone has different spices. Some people have dozens and dozens of little jars. Others just have the basics. Salt, pepper, maybe some garlic powder. It all depends on what you like to cook. Or, if you even cook at all. Some people just order takeout. Which is perfectly fine. But if you do have spices, and you want to find them easily, then alphabetizing is a good idea. It just makes things simpler. You know where everything is. No more searching. No more wasted time. Just open the cupboard and there it is. The spice you're looking for. Right where it should be. We started by mentioning removing all the spices from the rack. It's a necessary first step. You need a clear surface to work with. And it lets you see what you have. Sometimes you forget about spices hidden at the back. Maybe an old jar of oregano. Or some cumin that's lost its cumin-ness. Taking everything out also allows you to clean the rack. A bit of dusting. Maybe a quick wipe. It's a good opportunity. While it's empty. Before you put everything back in alphabetical order. A clean and organized spice rack. Very satisfying. Then there's the sorting. Once you have everything out, you can start sorting. Putting the A's together, the B's together, and so on. It's a bit like doing a puzzle, almost. But a very simple puzzle. A very straightforward puzzle. Not one of those 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzles. More like a puzzle with just a few pieces. Very easy to assemble. Just putting things in their correct place. Alphabetical place. From A to Z, a very logical system. And then, once you've sorted them, you can start putting them back on the rack. One by one. In their designated alphabetical positions. Starting with A and working your way through the alphabet. A very methodical process. Not rushed. Take your time. There's no hurry. Just place each spice jar in its rightful place. It's quite calming, actually. A quiet, methodical task. Alphabetizing spices. Remember to consider the size of the jars. Sometimes you have larger jars and smaller jars. It might be visually appealing to arrange them in a certain way. Maybe put the larger jars at the back. Or group them together. It's a matter of personal preference. There's no right or wrong way to do it. As long as they're in alphabetical order, of course. That's the main thing. Alphabetical order. It just makes it easier to find things. Yes, it's all about having a system. A way of organizing things. So that you can easily find what you're looking for. Whether it's paprika, or cumin, or any other spice. Having an organized spice rack can make cooking just a little bit easier. A little bit less stressful. And a little bit more organized. Which is a good thing. Organization is good, especially in the kitchen. So, to recap, remove the spices, clean the rack, sort alphabetically, and then put them back. A simple process, but an effective one, and quite calming, too. A nice, quiet activity for a peaceful evening. Just you and your spices. And the alphabet. A to Z very orderly system. Good night and sweet dreams. So, we were talking about alphabetizing the spice rack. It's important to, consider the actual process of alphabetization. Like, what does it even mean to alphabetize? Well, it involves arranging items in a sequence according to the alphabet. A comes before B, B before C, and so on. Sometimes I forget which letter comes first, so I have a little chart I keep tucked away in the drawer. It's laminated, a nice pale blue. Helps me remember. It's really quite helpful, especially when you're dealing with a lot of spices. You wouldn't want to put cumin before cinnamon, for instance. Or perhaps you would. It's a personal choice, I suppose. But traditionally, alphabetically, cinnamon comes first. Yes, the traditional method is generally preferred. Though, of course, one could deviate. Consider the implications of placing, say, marjoram before mint. Mint, starting with M, should technically precede marjoram. Unless, of course, you're using a different system altogether. Some people arrange by color or by frequency of use. My aunt arranges hers by the size of the container. She says it's aesthetically pleasing. I find it mildly confusing. But she's quite content with it. So, back to alphabetizing. You'll want to take each spice container, one by one, and look carefully at the label. The first letter is key. Right, the first letter is the most important. But then, what if two spices start with the same letter? Like, say, paprika and parsley. Well, then you move on to the second letter. A comes before E, so paprika goes before parsley. It can get quite complicated, especially if you have a large collection of spices. Sometimes I just stare at the spice rack and feel overwhelmed. So many little jars and bottles. All those different smells. It can be a bit much. Then I just close the cupboard and make toast instead. Overwhelm is understandable. One technique to manage this is to remove all the spices from the rack. Placing them on a countertop provides a clearer view and allows for easier manipulation. This can be done in stages, perhaps focusing on one section of the rack at a time. Imagine a small section, maybe just 5 or 6 spice jars. Once removed, you can begin the process of sorting. This method reduces the visual clutter and allows for a more focused approach to alphabetization. I sometimes use a small tray for this purpose. A plain white one. It's easier to see the labels that way. A tray is a good idea. It keeps things contained. I once tried alphabetizing my spices directly on the shelf, but they kept toppling over. It was quite frustrating. So, a tray, or even a tea towel. Spread it out on the counter, carefully arrange the spices. It sounds rather soothing, actually. Almost meditative, just gently moving little jars around. Thinking about the letters of the alphabet. A, B, C. It's calming in a way. Unless you're in a hurry, of course. Indeed, rushing the process can negate the inherent calming effect. It's not a race. Take your time. Examine each label carefully. Consider the placement of each spice. Ensure adequate spacing between the containers. This not only facilitates visual clarity but also allows for easier retrieval when cooking. It's about creating a functional and aesthetically pleasing spice rack. A well-organized spice rack can bring a sense of order to the kitchen. And perhaps even to life itself. A sense of order. Yes, that's a good way to put it. It's satisfying, having everything in its place. Knowing where to find the oregano when you need it. Or the thyme. Or the tarragon. It just makes things simpler. And simpler is good. Especially when it comes to cooking. Cooking can be complicated enough as it is. All those different ingredients and instructions. So, a well-organized spice rack is a small step towards simplifying the process. Precisely. Small steps. Starting with the first letter. Then the second. And so on. Methodically working through the alphabet. One spice at a time. It's a manageable task when broken down into smaller components. It doesn't require specialized equipment or extensive training. Just a basic understanding of the alphabet. And a little patience. Which, incidentally, is a virtue. A virtue that can be cultivated through activities like alphabetizing your spice rack. Good night and sweet dreams. So, as we were saying, alphabetizing can bring a certain order. A sense of calm, perhaps. I find it soothing to know where things are. Not just spices, of course. Although spices are a good example. They can be quite numerous, and sometimes their names are unusual. I'm thinking of things like asafoetida. Not everyone has asafoetida, I suppose. But if you do, you'll want to know where it is. Alphabetizing helps with that. It's a system, really. A way of organizing the world, even if it's just a small part of it. Like a spice rack, or a bookshelf, or a collection of stamps. Although, I don't collect stamps. Do you collect stamps? It's a rather specific hobby. I don't collect stamps. I've never really considered it. Though I do appreciate organization. It's efficient. It saves time, I suppose. When you're looking for something specific, you know where to find it. Like cumin, or coriander. They're quite close together alphabetically. Which is convenient, if you use them together often. Some recipes call for both. I made a lentil soup recently. It had both cumin and coriander. And turmeric, which is further down the alphabet. It's that bright yellow one. Very distinctive. It stains things easily. I once spilled some on a white shirt. It never quite came out. It was a rather nice shirt, too. A shame, really. Stains are persistent. They can be difficult to remove. Sometimes, even impossible. Like that turmeric stain on your shirt. A reminder of a lentil soup, perhaps. Or maybe just a reminder of the fallibility of things. Things get stained. Things get misplaced. Things get lost. That's just the way of it. Alphabetizing can't prevent that, entirely. But it can help. In a small way. It's a small act of control, I suppose. In a world that often feels uncontrolled. Like a spice rack. A small, manageable space. Where things can be ordered. Order. Yes. It's comforting. To know where things are. To have a system. Even a small system. Like alphabetizing your spices. It's a way of imposing order on the world. Or a small part of it. A very small part. But still, it's something. It's better than nothing. Though, sometimes, even nothing is okay. Sometimes, it's good to just be. Without systems. Without order. Just existing. Like a grain of sand. On a beach. Lost among countless other grains of sand. Grains of sand, countless. Innumerable. Impossible to count. Like stars in the sky. Or the leaves on a tree. Or the drops of water in the ocean. Vastness. It can be overwhelming. Sometimes. To think about the sheer scale of things. It makes our small acts of order seem insignificant. Almost pointless. Like alphabetizing a spice rack. In the face of infinity. It's a strange thought. Infinity. Yes. It's a large concept. Difficult to grasp. Like trying to hold water in your hands. It slips through your fingers. Elusive. Ungraspable. Like time. It keeps moving. Forward. Relentlessly. We try to measure it. To quantify it. With clocks and calendars. But it's still elusive. Like a dream. Fading upon waking. Dreams, they are ephemeral. Fleeting. Gone before you can fully grasp them. Like wisps of smoke. Disappearing into the air. Leaving only a faint memory. A trace. A whisper. Of something that was, but is no longer. Like the scent of spices. Lingering in the kitchen. After the meal is over. A phantom taste. On the tongue. A phantom taste. Yes. A lingering sensation. A reminder of something that was. But is no more. Like the memory of alphabetizing your spice rack. A small act. A fleeting moment. In the vastness of time. In space. Lost in the immensity of everything. Good night and sweet dreams. So, as we were saying, alphabetizing your spice rack can be quite the undertaking. I mean, you have to consider the size of the jars, the different shapes, whether they are round or square, or even rectangular. Some people have those little tins, you know, the ones with the see-through lids? Those can be tricky to fit in. And then there's the issue of duplicates. Do you keep them together? Or separate them? I suppose it depends on how many duplicates you have. And of course, the labels themselves. Sometimes they peel, sometimes they fade, and sometimes they're just hard to read. It really does make you think about all the different elements involved. I think I've used my cumin 3 times this month. Not bad at all. Yes, the labels are a significant factor. You have handwritten ones, printed ones, some with pictures, some without. Then there's the font size to consider. Is it large enough to see from a distance? Or do you need to squint? And what about the color of the labels? Do they clash with the color of your spice rack? These are the sorts of questions that keep me up at night. I find a neutral background is usually best, something like beige or off-white. Although a light gray can also work quite well. I remember once, I spent a whole afternoon just rearranging my spice rack. It was a process. And then the next day, I had to do it all over again because I bought a new spice. Paprika, I think it was. Or maybe turmeric. Turmeric. Yes, turmeric. It stains everything, doesn't it? I once spilled some on my white countertop. That was a disaster. Speaking of disasters, I once knocked my entire spice rack over. It was a mess. Spices everywhere. I think I found some stray coriander seeds months later. So, yes, stability is another factor to consider. A sturdy spice rack is essential. Preferably one with a lip or a small railing to prevent slippage. I think I'll make some tea. Would you like some? Oh, no thank you. I had a cup earlier. Chamomile. It was quite soothing. I usually have chamomile before bed. Or sometimes peppermint. It depends on my mood, really. But back to spice racks, have you considered rotating your spices? Some people believe it's important to use the older spices first to avoid spoilage. I'm not entirely convinced it makes much difference, but it's something to think about. I suppose it depends on how often you use them. Some spices last longer than others. Like salt, for instance. Salt practically lasts forever. Salt. Yes, salt. A staple. Although, technically, it's not a spice, is it? It's a mineral, I think. Or is it a seasoning? I'm never quite sure. Anyway, where were we? Ah yes, alphabetizing. It can be a surprisingly complex task. So many variables. Perhaps we should categorize them by cuisine? Indian spices together, Italian spices together. It could be a whole new system. Though that might require a much larger spice rack. A larger spice rack. Yes, that could lead to further complications. More space, more spices, more decisions. Perhaps it's best to keep things simple. A small, manageable collection. Just the essentials. Salt, pepper, maybe a little paprika. That's all one really needs, isn't it? Although, a touch of oregano can be quite nice in tomato sauce. And I do enjoy a pinch of chili flakes now and then. Chili flakes. Yes, they add a certain something. A bit of heat, a touch of spice. Or is it spiciness? I always get those two confused. Perhaps we should leave this for another time. It's getting quite late. We've barely scratched the surface, haven't we? There's so much more to discuss. The nuances of nutmeg, the complexities of cardamom. Indeed, we could go on for hours. But perhaps we should rest now. There's always tomorrow. And the day after that. And the day after that. So much time. So many spices. It can be quite overwhelming, really. But in a gentle, soothing sort of way. If you find this episode helpful, please consider liking and subscribing. Good night and sweet dreams.